Dr. Kelly McCann, welcome to Podcastina.
Thank you so much for having me, Galena. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much for joining. Could we start with a little bit on your background?
Sure. I'm a medical doctor, trained conventionally. I did my medical school at Tulane. I got a master's in public health, and then I went on and did a residency program in Phoenix in internal medicine and pediatrics. And then I started my practice. After I got a fellowship training in integrative medicine, I moved to California and opened my practice in Southern California. And I do functional integrative environmental medicine and incorporating spiritual psychology with that.
I love that. I'm a huge believer in the mind body connection and the impact that that has on our overall well being. And I know when I originally found you that you do a ton of work around environmental toxins and things that we need to be mindful of in our environments. And I might start with the scariest question first, at least for me,
Okay. Sure.
which is how worried should we be about plastics?
Well, let's try and take the worry and the fear out of it and just feel empowered about the choices that we have. So, yes, plastic is ubiquitous, and we are constantly being exposed. So, plastic is a big deal. I don't want to. I don't want to diminish that. Um, and at this moment in time, there aren't great ways to get plastic out of the body, which should be eye opening and hopefully it's like stimulating to get people to stop using plastic as much as they can, because at this point we can't get it out, and we know that plastics get broken down into what we call microplastics, which can get into the body, into the organs, and even smaller particles called nanoplastics. And they're finding nanoplastics in the brain and the testes and the ovaries and the placenta, the heart. So these little tiny plastic particles get everywhere. And much of the plastic is also combined with other chemicals. So there are things like phthalates, which make plastic soft, or parabens, which makes plastic hard. And those have endocrine disrupting effects and immune system disrupting effects. And then the plastics can also be combined with heavy metals and other chemicals, pesticides, etc. So the more that we can bring an awareness to the plastic in our life and remove it as much as possible, the better off our health will be.
What are some of the worst kind of common household offenders? Like what kinds of plastic items leach the worst, if that's the correct way to put it?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure somebody is doing some kind of kinetic studies to figure that out. But, start with the things that are obvious. Stop drinking out of plastic water bottles. buy your buy your water. If you're going to buy water, buy it in glass or stainless steel, and preferably you want to filter your water as well. You don't have to filter if it's in glass. You don't have to filter that water, but um, we need to be filtering our water because there's a lot of other chemicals in water as well. So that's one of the first things that I really encourage people to pay attention to, and and then we have choices when we're buying our food as well, right? Please do not ever heat food in plastic. Those convenience frozen vegetable packages where they're like, oh, just heat it up in the plastic. Oh my God, no, please take it out of the plastic container, boil it on the stove, even put it in the microwave. That's going to be better, like in a crock pot or something. Um, that would be far better than um, microwaving it in the plastic. So really thinking about how we're preparing our food, how we're cooking, and then what is the plastic wrapping around the food. You can go to the butcher's counter and get meat rather than buying, and that would be wrapped in paper, as opposed to going to the prepackaged food sections where it's wrapped in plastic. So ideally, we'd be avoiding plastic that way. Um, but honestly, some of the biggest offenders and the things that are going to really wake people up. Um, there's plastic particles in the dust from all of our clothing material that's made with polyester, from our kids' toys or our computers, our stereo systems. So much of our material goods, our alarm clocks, our, like everything is plastic. And as that plastic breaks down over time, it ends up in the dust. And then it's really important that we're vacuuming on a regular basis. We're dusting and getting rid of the particles in our dust. But yeah, I have to say a little bit on the polyester. So there are so many of our clothing items that we're wearing that are polyester, the lycra, the spandex. I mean, everybody loves, most women love their yoga pants. And
I'm in some now.
yeah, and they're super comfy and they're easy. And as we wash them, the particles get into the water system. As we dry them, the particles get into the air, and those are part of that contamination. Luckily, there are clothing companies out there that are making plastic free yoga pants and exercise clothing, and they're reasonably priced, and they're like wonderful. So there are other options out there. It just takes some time to like transition your wardrobe over, but I do think that it's important that we need to know about these things and to make different choices.
I would imagine because when you start talking about the availability of foods at grocery stores, especially like even the vegetables that we're grabbing and, getting those bags to put it in, even when it's like fresh whole foods that we're supposed to be focusing on consuming, and kind of everything comes in plastic, like the to go packages at restaurants. And almost anything in the grocery store, that's like a really hard place to avoid it. How much is it, more dangerous when there's like heat involved, when you're using a plastic spatula or with the water bottle in the car? I know a lot of people have heard, never drink out of it in that way. And
Yes.
I think like maybe the way to address it is to cut back on areas where it's like easier and more obvious, like the cutbacks, so that
Yes.
people don't get overwhelmed with these things. Because even just thinking about like a walk through the grocery store, I'm like, what hasn't touched plastic?
Oh, I know. It's completely overwhelming. And that's really not my intention. I think, Galena, your suggestion is perfect. Like, look at the low hanging fruit. Look at the things that are really easy. Instead of grabbing that plastic water bottle, get a glass water bottle, or better yet, get your own bottle and bring it with you, right? I carry my water bottle with me everywhere. I have a purse that is big enough to carry it with me, or you can get one of those like, water bottle sling things, and you can just carry it that way. It's kind of geeky, but at the same time, like, you're prepared. And you can get bamboo utensils that you bring with you, and they've got little, cute little container. And you just carry a bag or put it in your car or whatever, however it is that you need to, so that you have access to non-plastic utensils, for example. So there are ways to really just slowly make changes. I mean, my encouragement would be pick one change a week. And then after 52 weeks, you're living a different life, but you haven't overwhelmed yourself, right?
Yeah, baby steps.
Baby
Now, you
steps.
had alluded earlier, that once we have these microplastics, these nanoplastics within our different systems around our heart and our brain and our blood, and I know they impact hormones as well, what are some of the common signs? And then how can we address it if we can't really reverse the intake?
Well, we can lower our burden of other things too, right? And so we may not be able to get the plastics, microplastics, and nanoplastics out, but we can get the phthalates and bisphenols out. We can get heavy metals out. We can get pesticides out. So there are other things that we can do. Sauna actually is an amazing way to detox, and it's a very popular these days. Combine it with red light therapy, and you're like, and then some cold plunging, and you're good to go. Little longevity trio there. But we do have medical literature that supports that these toxins can get out of the body through sweat. So there are ways to lower the burden of other things. And then to circle back to your question of like what symptoms show up. I mean, many of the symptoms that you kind of already alluded to, so it can affect your hormones. So for some women, they may have more painful periods. They might have, more dysregulated periods, irregular periods. For men, their testosterone levels might be very low. So, and, unfortunately, many things can cause hormonal dysregulation, but looking at your toxin burden is a powerful way to start to take control over what's going on with your hormonal health. Other symptoms that show up when we have environmental chemicals are immune system problems. So a lot of people, women especially, are developing autoimmune conditions, or they might have a couple markers that look suspicious for an autoimmune tendency, but that you don't yet meet the criteria for a diagnosable disorder. There's probably some environmental chemical exposure involved in that, and so making these healthy daily choices plus working on sauna or other forms of detoxification, like eating healthy food, lots of green vegetables, alkalinizing the water that you are drinking. So adding lemon or lime or carbonated water, those things alkalinize the system a little bit to help with getting rid of some toxins. And if people are really sick, we can talk about more deeper dive kinds of detox if you want.
Yeah, I would love to because I think there's so much kind of use of the word detox as a marketing tool. And I know it's employed in things like anything from herbal teas to unregulated supplements. And it would be good to shed some light on what are actually effective methods for detox.
Yeah, so doing a parasite cleanse is not a detox. Let's just say that.
Okay.
and, and practitioners who are telling you that that's going to help, okay, not so clear about that. So there is medical literature. I mean, I think let me back up a little bit before we start talking about detox, and let's talk about the chemicals. So we can break the chemicals into two major groups, um, those that are persistent in the body and in the environment, and those that aren't. So when we're talking about things like the phthalates that are making the plastic soft, not the actual physical particles, but the chemicals in those particles, the chemicals in the plastic, those we can get out of the body. They're not persistent, right? Same thing with the bisphenols. These are the things that make plastic hard, like the Nalgene bottles that everybody used to use in the 90s. Those are made with BPA, baby what like babies bottles, that's BPA. And then what happened was that we realized that BPA was bad for us, and so then they started making all these substitution kinds of bisphenols like BPS and BPF. Guess what? Just as bad as BPA. So a BPA free bottle is not necessarily a toxin free bottle unless it's glass.
Wow.
So so don't be fooled by the marketing. um, and bisphenols, whether it's A, F, S, whatever, they are not persistent in the body. So if we stop using them, we can get rid of them out of the body. So those are good things. Then there's a lot of fragrances, what we call solvents and VOCs. And this is where the personal care product, makeup, those sorts of things that women use a lot of, that's where a lot of those chemicals come in. They're not persistent in the environment or in our bodies, but we use them. We slather stuff on our skin on a daily basis, and so really one of those weeks of the year, or perhaps multiple weeks in the year, you want to look at your personal care products and see, is there something out there that's really clean, and is the packaging clean as well, right? So buying products that are in glass or stainless steel, or like now they have deodorants that are in paper, right? There's sort of this solidified paper. Those might be better than the other options. So just some thoughts. Um, and then on the hard to get out of the body, persistent in the body, that's going to be your metals. And the biggest sources of metals for most of us is actually in our diet and fish. So people who love sushi, you're getting a lot of mercury, unfortunately. Fish is not as healthy as it used to be because the oceans are contaminated. And so we have to be cautious and limit our fish intake. Um, and then, the other places that people get heavy metals, tobacco. So, tobacco use very high in cadmium because they use certain kinds of fertilizers to grow the tobacco that then gets in the tobacco, that then gets in the person. So some of the patients who have either had family members who were smokers or they themselves were smokers, their cadmium levels are generally very high. And cadmium can definitely be an issue. Um, the other heavy metal that I'm concerned about is lead. On the East Coast and the Midwest, you're going to have older homes that have leaded pipes. And so that's important to check. In California, we don't have a lot of lead, um, luckily, in our pipes. But the people who I find have the highest lead levels are postmenopausal women because the lead was deposited in their bones when they were younger and is now leaching out. And anyone who is a gun enthusiast. So, police officers who have to go to shooting ranges, amateur gun enthusiasts. I have a young man in my practice, and his lead level was very, very high. In his blood because he was going to the shooting range a couple days a week. And it's definitely causing a lot of issues for him. A lot of cognitive issues, brain fog, fatigue, just general malaise, and metabolic issues as well.
Wow, that's really eye-opening, and a lot of those things impact me a lot. Like, I eat a ton of fish, particularly raw fish, and I know that that's bad for me, so it's pretty scary to hear that the metals in that are worrisome. And then you also touched on something that I was going to ask about anyway. As someone who does enjoy candles and perfumes, is there a safe way to enjoy fragrances in our life? Is there a way to have that still be an element, but to kind of add some safety, some barriers to it?
I'd probably stick with essential oils and then make sure that the companies that you're using are reputable companies. Um, I I have a name of a company that I am now forgetting. I will share that. But yeah, there are definitely good essential oils that if you like fragrance, I would do that. And um, in terms of like perfumes and fragrances in personal care products, I unless they're essential oils, they probably are. Chemicals in that are not a good idea. So you really need to do some homework and try and figure out what fragrances are there, because many of them are just toxic chemicals, unfortunately, and they're going to interfere with your body's ability to sense that there's an issue. And they're great potentiators of sensitivity. So a lot of people who end up developing chemical sensitivity, it's because of these different kinds of volatile organic compounds or solvents. So not to worry you, Galena, but just to really encourage you. Like, I think as consumers, we have an idea that the government and the FDA is going to protect us, and that is not true. We really have to be our own advocates for our own health and our patient and our family's health, because Superman isn't going to come save us.
Yeah, unfortunately not. Is there, I wanted to ask because sometimes I've had this like sense that, oh, I'll walk in somewhere and if someone has like a Glade plug in, it kind of automatically gives me a headache or it automatically makes my stomach not feel okay. And I'm wondering, what role does our intuition play in identifying what hurts us specifically versus like what, some people might be okay with certain things. It might not bother them at all, right? We're all different. So, how do we kind of listen to that intuition and use it as a tool to identify when something is a stressor in our environment?
Yeah, these are great questions. And absolutely, if you feel sick when you are exposed to something, it really is not a good idea. I mean, I hate when I get into the Uber and they've got those like fragrance pine things. I just want to tell them, hey, you know what? You're poisoning yourself and you're poisoning your passengers. Please throw that out. um, I don't generally say anything, but yeah, I stick my head out the window as much as I can. It's like, it's 32 degrees, lady. Why do you have the window down? Anyway, I digress. So here's the thing, just because you aren't sensitive doesn't mean it's not impacting you,
Mm,
right? We are all on this planet. We are all being exposed to many, many different chemicals. Just because you're not sensitive doesn't mean it's not impacting you and getting into your body and becoming part of your total load. um, I'm going to digress a little bit more and then we'll come back to the intuition piece. So, the way that I think about it is everyone's body is a sink. I mean, historically we used a bucket, but I like the sink idea because you can have a really big sink and a huge drain, and all these things can come into your sink. And if the drain is big enough and you've got a really deep sink, you can tolerate a lot. The threshold above which you start to have symptoms is very high. And if you have great genetics and you live a healthy lifestyle, whatever, the drain works to get rid of the toxins or to help you detoxify them and move them out, or keep them in a place that's safe in the body. But some people have really shallow sinks and narrow drains, right? And for those people, when the sink gets full, that's when things overflow and the symptoms show up. Um, I think of symptoms as a really important um, check engine light that comes on. And so when you do feel poorly because somebody's got a plug in, or you get a headache after going into Bed Bath and Beyond or whatever, right? Um, that's a real important thing to honor, because your body is being wise and telling you, hey, it's time to get out. This is not a safe environment for you. So honor that, and make the choice to get out. That may also be encouraging you to say, hey, your sink is close to the edge. It's time to start doing some detoxification, so that you can lower that burden. Um, and there's a fine line too, because I have a lot of patients who go on and become extremely sensitive, not just to scents or, what have you, but then they start becoming sensitive to the food that they're eating, pressure, temperature changes, and they develop a condition called mast cell activation syndrome, where the immune system start and the nervous system start to see that people are I'm sorry, that there's threats everywhere. So there's a continuum, and people with mast cell activation, it could be environmental chemicals that is driving some of that reactivity, could be other things too. So absolutely honoring your body and honoring the messages and the symptoms that are showing up is really, really important. And then figuring out, okay, what are the things that are causing those messages to show up, both in the environment, and then really looking at okay, what can I do to lower my burden overall? And then is there a nervous system dysregulation piece that maybe I need to work on too? Am I constantly stressed? Am I stuck in fight or flight? Are there ways that I can help retrain my nervous system to not feel like it's in danger all the time?
That's huge. Thank you for that. And I love a good analogy. So the sink thing really resonates and is easy to picture because that's when someone with, maybe they're more immunocompromised than the average person. Maybe they've been exposed to more. And I constantly think about, I like to joke that my system is stronger than other systems because my mom had gotten pregnant with me not that far from Chernobyl, not that long after it happened. So I'm like, well, if I
Mm.
survive that, I can eat a little bit of sushi, but it's actually more of like a red flag. But somehow, I'm lucky overall, I think, to like not have it be an ongoing issue and to at this point in my life not have any kinds of knock on wood like air, immunocompromising things that are going on. But I wanted to talk about something that had like a little scare earlier this year, and I think a
Sure.
lot of people don't think about this as much as they should. But how prevalent do you think mold poisoning is, and what are common signs with that, and how do we prevent it?
Oh my goodness, we could do a whole podcast on mold alone. I mean, if you want, but we'll do a little bit. And so, mold. When we're talking about molds, you're talking about molds in a home or a building where
Yes.
there's been water damage, and we need to think about molds as they are just trying to live out their lives, and they're looking for two things: moisture and then sort of wood and paper. That's really what they grow on. They can also grow on dust. And so, if there is a plumbing issue, if there is a leak because of, a leaky window or a leaky door, or the shower is leaking, you're getting water, continual water and moisture around a shower. In California, we have a lot of issues with mold. So there's sprinkler systems which we have running constantly because we don't get enough rain here, and so the sprinkler systems are hitting the houses. Then you've got, persistent moisture, and we build with wood and paper, right? Sheetrock is really just paper,
Mm-hmm.
and we're building with 2x4s and 4x6s and things like that. So the statistics show, and these statistics are fairly old now, but about 50% of homes have some form of water damage. I think
Wow.
it's actually higher, but it's a high percentage. And then in some of the other buildings, some of the studies show up to 85%. So these are your office buildings, schools, churches, businesses, shops, etc., have some sort of water damage. That's a lot.
That's
That's
a
a
lot.
lot. And not everybody is affected the same, just like with the chemicals and the whole sink idea. There are certain genetics that seem to have a harder time with mold exposure. And the problems are not just the mold and all the other things that grow in a water damaged building, including bacteria, and there's also, building materials, and the 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 molds create their own volatile organic compounds that can, have problems. That's a musty smell, right, that we sense. That also can be problematic. But then the molds are in a war, and their
Hmm.
warfare are called mold toxins or mycotoxins. And so we happen to be innocent bystanders in a mold war over resources, and they are producing their own mycotoxins to try and fight each other for those resources. And the mold toxins, they're not living organisms, they're just metabolites. And these metabolites are often what is making us sick when we're exposed to mold in water damaged buildings.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the wood and paper element of it because to me that almost feels counterintuitive. Like the scare that we went through, we started having strange spots coming through the rug in places where they shouldn't be. And it's carpet, you know, it's like shitty plastic carpet that we have. So I kind of thought it was that, and I hadn't considered, but that kind of, you know, it should make people think, like, what materials is their home being built out of? Can they help it? Should we be getting inspections before we move into a new rental? Things of that nature. Yeah.
It gets crazy. So sometimes what happens, what I'm finding, what my mold inspectors here in Southern California are telling me is that when they're building the buildings, so you've got your slab. Here we use slabs. At other places they might have a basement, but here we have slabs. And then if you put the vinyl flooring right on the slab, there's no space for air to flow, and there's no space to prevent any moisture from the slab to being it's basically being wicked up into the flooring. And if it's a polyvinyl flooring, guess what? We're looping back to the plastic conversation. But then there's other molecules, other ingredients in there that are going to be uh, able to be um, used as feed or fuel for the molds. And yeah, that might have been what's happening. And it depends, of course. There could have been a leaky pipe or something underneath the floor. And it's, most people can spot, okay, there's a little bit of mildew in my shower and I need to clean that. Or even mold in my washer. That may not be the mold that I'm talking about. That may not be a mold toxin producing mold. No, it's not great, but it's not the devil, right? Usually the molds that produce mold toxins are behind the walls. If
Mm.
there's a leak in the pipe, if things aren't sealed properly, if there's plumbing issues, or there's water intrusion issues because the windows and the doors weren't sealed properly. um, they're much more likely to have a problem that you can't see. Well, in your case, you were kind of lucky that you did start to see that there was something happening there.
Yeah, we did the testing and everything, and thankfully it was fine and it didn't come back, and it just remains this odd mystery. I think the other part of this that I want to discuss, and you'll have insight to this, when people are experiencing what might be symptoms related to environmental poisons, toxins, mold, whether it's from fragrances, long term plastic exposure, why is it that these types of issues are so hard to diagnose? Because over and over again, I hear people complaining of, you know, persistent brain fog and all these new symptoms and things that probably aren't age related and aren't specifically condition related. And you hear time and time again the difficulty for getting a diagnosis.
Not We weren't taught this. I wasn't taught this in conventional medical school. I wasn't taught any of this in my residency program. So that's 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency. Um, I actually wasn't even taught this in my integrative medicine program, just a little tiny bit, right? Just a
Wow.
little tiny bit, enough for me to know, oh my goodness, I need to learn this. And so then I had to do a whole other fellowship, and have spent, the rest of my career really trying to learn more about environmental chemicals and how they impact our health. So these are not things that are taught to conventional medical doctors. And even those functional medicine doctors, they might get a little bit of lip service to it. And then on top of that, we don't have great tests. In fact, we have abysmal tests. Um, so a couple of the chemicals none of the chemicals that I talked about so far, other than metals, can really be tested in commercial labs. You go to LabCorp, you go to Quest, you go to Clear, your conventional doctor. They don't have any training and they don't have any tests. They can't help you. They don't know how to make that diagnosis. And then from a conventional standpoint, their job is not to find the root cause. You go to your primary care doctor who has done absolutely no training or very little training in functional and integrative medicine. Their job, this is an aha moment that I had in residency. Like, the job of a medical provider is to find the diagnosis. What are your symptoms? How do they line up with possible diagnostic criteria? And then what is your diagnosis? And once I have that label for you, then I can tell you what medications or surgery you need, right? So there's no interest in why. That's why they can't help you, because they don't, that's not part of their paradigm. That's not part of the paradigm that's taught in conventional school. If you go to a functional doctor, they are looking for the root cause. But as I mentioned, we don't have a lot of great tests for chemicals. I think Brian Johnson has a plastic test. I still have to do it and figure out if it's any good. Hopefully, it's good. But there are a couple of lab tests that you can do looking for metals through a commercial lab. So you can check your whole blood lead level. You can check your whole blood mercury level. It sounds like, Lena, that would be a good thing to ask for.
Yeah.
But you can't check anything else. You can't check cadmium, really. Blood doesn't matter. And the challenge with those metals is the metals are not really in your bloodstream for very long. If you have a fish meal in 60 days, that mercury level that was in the blood, let's say you have a fish meal and your mercury level is 10 if we check it the next day. In 60 days, if you don't have any more fish and any more exposures, that level is 5 in 60 days. Where did it go? Well, some of it got out of the body, but most of it went into the tissue. So it's not in the bloodstream. And then another 60 days, it's two and a half, right? So the half life in the blood is very short. The half life in the brain is about 30 years.
Wow.
So, um, super important to know. But we can't really test what's in your tissues. That's part of the problem, is that we don't have great tests for that. We can do a provocation test, which gives me a rough idea, but that's complicated. And you have to have a practitioner who really knows what they're doing in order to do that safely with a patient and then, be able to interpret it. um, there is a test commercially available for parafluorinates. These are the PFASs that are called forever chemicals. They're flame retardants. But the threshold for that test is not, it's not great. I've run it on, I don't know, a dozen, 20 people in my practice. They've all come back negative. Well, that may be that there's no perfluorinates in the water here, but 50%, almost 50%, I think the statistic is 45% of public water sources in the United States are contaminated with levels of forever chemicals, PFASs, that are above the threshold of the recommendations. What? That's crazy. That's crazy. Um, and we got to filter that stuff out because we can't get it out, just like we can't get plastics out. Um, so, what do we do? Well, we can ask for that blood test. They do it through Quest. We can filter our water regardless. We can probably try and test our water. There are a couple different places to test our water. But you spend $600 to test your water, you might as well just buy a filter.
Right.
So, yeah, there's a lot of things out there, and it can be completely overwhelming. I feel like I've overwhelmed your listeners and overwhelmed myself just talking about it. So, so I go back to like, pick one thing, and maybe, heck, listen to this podcast a couple different times because you'll
Hmm.
get something out of it each time you do, and then make your choices about what you're going to do every week and do one thing. Get rid of plastic water bottles. Get rid of all your food containers that are plastic. Go buy glass. The next week, maybe you're going to sit down with an app like Yucca or Skin Deep and at least start to go through some of your personal care products. Maybe you start with like your shampoos and your lotions, right? And then maybe in another week or so, you can look at your makeup and you just slowly go through everything that's out there so that you can be empowered and make healthy choices for yourself and your family and not get overwhelmed.
Thank you. Those are all really digestible, small baby steps, so people don't get overwhelmed, as we were talking about earlier. What is a provocation test? Is that a way that people can advocate for themselves when they're, insisting on testing for some of these toxins?
Only for metals, right?
Okay.
Only for metals. Yeah. So if somebody had, so for example, I have a woman in my practice whose boyfriend or husband is a fisherman, and they eat the fish that he catches. And our mercury levels are really high. So she would benefit from a provocation test, because if I do a blood level, that doesn't tell me her lifetime accumulation. It tells me that snapshot in time of what the level is in the blood. But as I mentioned, the half life of mercury in the brain is 30 years. So I don't know what's in the tissues. A chelation provocation test can give me a slightly better idea of what's in the tissues. So what we do is a first morning urine, and we check the metal levels. And this is done through a couple different companies. I prefer a company called Doctor's Data. And then I give an IV or an oral form of a chelator that goes into the body and grabs those metals and binds them more tightly to the chelator than the metal binds to the tissues. So it grabs those metals and it makes it safe to excrete them in the stool or the urine. And then we collect urine after that IV or oral chelation, the provocation, and then we see how much additional metals, mercury, cadmium, lead, antimony, etc., get released in the urine after a certain amount of time. And so it gives me a rough idea of how much might be left in the tissues. There are some functional tests for other kinds of chemicals, like phthalates, bisphenols, pesticides, different kinds of solvents, that are possible too. But they're not comprehensive by any stretch of the imagination. They just give us an idea. At some of these, you have to work with a healthcare provider to order those tests, and they're kind of functional labs. There are some tests that are available commercially. I think there's a company called the Million Marker Project that was really targeting young women who wanted to assess their personal care products in preparation for pregnancy. And that's something that you can order yourself. And it has you do a diary of all your personal care products and everything that you eat, like the 24 hours before you take the test. So it gives you a real uh, benchmark of like how healthy your personal care products are and where you have room for improvement.
Amazing. Well, I would love to end on a hopeful question, which is, do you think people are actively learning about these things more than they used to? Do you think we're moving towards a world where manufacturers are actually taking these things into consideration?
I do. I mean, I think if you go on any social media platform these days, people are talking much more about environmental chemicals. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole, you'll see many more companies that are offering better products, like the plastic free yoga exercise clothes that I mentioned. So there are people in that space, and I think that it's growing. I think that that space is growing. So if there's any entrepreneurs in your listeners, I would encourage people to really see where you feel passionate about making some difference in the world. And I think the more that this is going to be a grassroots thing, right? I do not think that we can wait for the government, no matter how well intentioned. I mean, I'm grateful for the movement and everything, but I think that progress is going to be really slow. Yay, no red dye number, whatever it is. but we really have to um, make choices and sound the alarm with our choices and say we're not going to put up with this crap anymore, and it's got to be better for the planet, it's got to be better for our health, it's got to be better for our children and our children's children, and we have the power to do that.
Couldn't agree more. And all the more reason that these conversations are so important. So I'm so happy you could join me today. Dr. Kelly McCann, where can people learn more about what you're doing?
Thank you. Yes, I have a brick and mortar practice in Southern California called the Spring Center. It's thespringcenter.com. And I also have a website of my own with webinars and blogs where you can learn a lot more about these different topics that we've talked about today. And I'm intending on launching an online program for people who either can't become patients or um, aren't interested in becoming patients. So look for that, hopefully launching in January.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
You're welcome, Galena. Thank you for your insightful questions and for being so enthusiastic about these topics, which I think are really important for the planet.
Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. Bye.